Today, all that remains of the Edwardian era are scattered artifacts, the odd bowler hat you might find at an antique store, cast-aside portraits of family and friends long gone. There's jittery black and white film footage of life in a world completely foreign to us today, but these people lived in a world just as vibrant, exciting, and colourful as our own today. We're seeing the past through an imperfect filter, and nowhere is that more evident than life aboard the big ocean liners. Today, there's no equivalent. Cruise ships are nothing like what these floating palaces once were. The rituals and the culture of days and weeks spent at sea has been relegated to the history books. This channel is all about taking you back in time and trying to bring the past to life. So today, let's try to turn back the pages of history and put you, dear friend, as a passenger aboard the newest and largest ocean liner in the world in 1912, the RMS Titanic. What was it like from day to day as passengers explored the new ship and made friends? How could you have spent your time aboard in the days leading up to that tragic disaster? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm your friend Mike Brady from Oceanliner Designs.
And I'm Max Miller from Tasting History.
And today we've partnered with Titanic Honour and Glory to take you aboard Titanic for a day in the life of a first-class passenger. Welcome back to 1912. It's a fresh April morning and you're preparing for departure as a passenger on board the newest steamship from the White Star Line, the RMS Titanic. From what you've heard, Titanic promises to be the latest and greatest in ocean travel, and as a first-class ticket holder, you intend to enjoy all the perks and amenities the ship has to offer. The sister of that ship, the Olympic, had already been in service for just under a year, and your friends who've travelled on her already have raved about their luxurious staterooms, the state-of-the-art amenities, and the sumptuous dining. As the newest ship in the fleet, Titanic promises to provide all of that luxury, plus more. As you carefully tuck your fineries into your steamer trunk, you imagine the excitement of dressing for an elaborate dinner party or a leisurely turn about the promenade deck. You check through your trunk to ensure you have all the clothing you'll need for your crossing, and you will need a bit. Women typically require at least one tailor-made suit, one pair of thick silk or woolen tights, 4 sets of combination undergarments, shirtwaists, a sweater, a woolen wrap for going to the bath, a dressy bodice for dinner, a pair of shoes with rubber soles or heels, and 3 pairs of pajamas. The man, however, would bring along a black coat for dinner, the necessary shirts for evening attire, a suit, woolen underclothing, the generous supply of handkerchiefs and socks, several pairs of pajamas, a bathrobe and slippers, and a mix of ties and detachable starched shirt collars. It sounds like a lot, but you have to prepare to dress for any and all occasions. Everything from morning on the decks to evening in the dining saloon needs to be accounted for. This being the ship's maiden voyage, key members of high society have booked their passage, whether it be for business or pleasure, and you fully expect to see a familiar face or two while exploring the ship, even making the acquaintance, hopefully, of somebody new and exciting. Pulling your head out of the clouds for just a moment, you turn your attention to a clock on the wall, and time's ticking away. It's almost the time for you to make for the station to board the train that will carry you and your friends to the White Star dock at Southampton. You take one last look in the mirror before stepping out the door. With a sudden excitement welling up in your chest, you slam your trunk shut with a thud, and you lock it tight, and your journey on board Titanic awaits. After loading up your mountain of cargo into an automobile, you're whisked away to Waterloo Station, and it's there you meet the boat train, fittingly referred to as the Titanic Special by its passengers, bound directly for the Southampton docks. Once you've paid porters to situate your luggage, you take your place on the train along with your friends, and you begin to acquaint yourself with some of the other faces you'll be seeing more of in the coming days. Your fellow passengers busy themselves with newspapers and spirited chatter. You watch out the windows as the scenery flies by, the hour-and-a-half-long train ride feeling like days in anticipation of boarding Titanic. You strike up some chatter with those around you. Everybody seems to be checking their pocket watches every few minutes, and then the conversation rises to a crescendo. There she is, the freshly painted black hull, towering smokestacks and gleaming white superstructure finally come into view, off in the distance at first, but then, as the train finally pulls into the station, the ship seems like she's barely a stone's throw away. Titanic is absolutely massive. In fact, the scale of her immediately becomes difficult to put into words. As you gaze upon the floating palace that will be your temporary new home, you are in awe. Titanic is nothing short of a marvel, and it's almost time to step on board. Your luggage is collected from the train and put into a cab. You make your way off and you begin to head towards the ship. On the docks, there is an absolute flurry of activity as passengers, porters, journalists, onlookers, and loved ones all make ready for the 12 noon departure. You step out of the cab into the shadow of the large warehouse-like building that serves as a terminal for departures and arrivals at Southampton docks. Everywhere, people fuss with luggage, stickers, and labels. Your steamer trunks are sorted into two types. Those wanted for the voyage, these will go straight to your stateroom, and those not wanted. These will go into the ship's hold for you to collect at New York. Stickers are already on the cases with all of your details, and the luggage is taken away for loading. Now, you need to only pass through customs and the ticket inspection with your party. The second and third class passengers have already boarded. They arrived earlier so they could pass through the much lengthier inspection queues. Now, you make your way up 3 flights of stairs and find yourself on an elevated gangway high above the ground that leads straight into the first class entrance on Titanic's B deck. You take one final glance at the towering sides of the steel behemoth from the gangway and notice she's massive, really, truly massive, unlike anything you've seen before. You can't gawk for too long though, because other anxious passengers are making their way onto the ship just behind you. You take a deep breath and step over the threshold. Just like that, you find yourself in an entirely different world. Your eyes immediately dart from wall to wall, taking in the marvelous space before you. It's immediately obvious that the ship truly means to be the final word in luxury at sea. Every inch of the space is ornately decorated like an English country home, and no detail has been overlooked. Once you collect yourself, your first order of business is to make your way to the purser's office, because this is where you'll make all your arrangements for the upcoming voyage, everything from dinner arrangements to entrusting your valuables, and even reserving your very own deck chair. That's all taken care of here, and on boarding day, it is pandemonium. While waiting in the lengthy queue to speak to the purser, you overhear a steward speaking in a flustered tone about a fellow passenger who was less than satisfied with her accommodations. Listening to the steward tell it all, the passenger, a Mrs. Shelley as he refers to her, had called her stateroom little more than a cell, which was bitterly cold and impossibly thin, and she insists that there must have been a mistake, that she'd somehow been put into second or third class. Now it was up to that steward to go to the purser on her behalf and see to it that the matter was resolved. The White Star Line may have gone a bit overboard in their superlative descriptions of the new ship, because some first-class cabins are indeed small and quite bare. Once all of your reservations have been handled at the purser's office, you're met by a steward who accompanies you to your stateroom. You follow him down a maze-like series of never-ending corridors until you reach the cabin. As you step inside, your immediate impression is that it's unlike anything you've seen before at sea. You imagine you'll be quite comfortable here for the duration of the crossing. The room is richly appointed in the style of Louis XVI, with touches of opulent white and gold throughout. You flip on your brand new electric heater to take the morning chill out of the air and marvel at such a thing being offered on a ship at sea. You take a moment sitting on the edge of your bed to take in the surroundings and the beautiful decor. You've travelled first class before, but never quite like this. You've hardly sat down when your friends are back at your side, urging you to head up to the boat deck to wave farewell as the ship begins to cast off from Southampton. You'd hate to miss such an exciting moment, so you follow them up through the beautiful oak-panelled grand staircase, and as you step outside, you notice the cool April breeze. You find a spot on the rail and let your eyes wander over the scene before you. Well wishes are heard in unfamiliar languages. There seems to be just as much laughter as there are tears, and the ship's flags wave merrily above your head. Crew members are hard at work on their final checks and casting off the lines that hold Titanic to land. After a few moments, you begin to sense motion beneath your feet, gradually at first, then more and more perceptible as the ship silently takes her first steps on her maiden voyage. Little by little, the cheerful crowd, with their waving handkerchiefs and smiling faces, begin to get farther and farther away. You turn your gaze towards the ship's bow and can't help but wonder what lies ahead. Boarding day is a strange, transient time, and you spend the rest of the day leisurely meandering through the ship, taking in every inch of the marvellous public spaces and acquainting yourself with everything Titanic has to offer. The electric energy present at boarding time has now died down to a lull, and it seems that everyone on board wishes to simply ease into the crossing. Later that evening, as you take in the sunset on the spacious promenade deck with your friends, the ship arrives at its first port of call, Cherbourg in France. But despite the ship having reached its destination, it stops very far from the shore. Sometime later, you observe a smaller ship approaching. This would of course be a tender ship, the SS Nomadic, specially designed for bringing passengers and mail on board. Someone told you earlier that Cherbourg's small harbour made it impossible for large ships to dock there, so anyone boarding Titanic needed to do so via tender. After sunset, with all aboard, you feel the decks vibrating gently beneath your feet as the engines start up, and Titanic takes to the ocean once again. The commotion of the day's events seems to be taking their toll on you and your fellow passengers. It creates an informal and a relaxed environment. Dinner, which is usually a highly formal affair, is much more casual this evening. It would be a social faux pas to wear your finery. A few hands of poker are dealt in the smoking room, the brandy's flowing, but there's an ease in the air as everyone settles into their new routine. Before long, you retire to your stateroom, ready to rest your sore feet and prepare for your first full day at sea. The next morning, you wake up, quick to get yourself out of bed and get dressed. You've hardly got a chance to get fully acquainted with the ship yet, and you're quite anxious to rendezvous with your friends and enjoy the newest and grandest liner at sea. Your first stop will be the first class smoking room, where you can pick up a copy of the ship's daily publication, the Atlantic Daily Bulletin. This single sheet of paper, written up by the wireless officers the night prior, helps keep you and your fellow passengers in the loop, even while being miles from the shore. In it, you find weather reports, stock market updates, news headlines, and even information on the ship's run and the miles it's travelled. The bulletin in hand, you and your group decide to head to breakfast in the open and airy Café Parisienne to chat about all of the day's activities, the news, events, and the gossip. But light refreshments and snacks are just the precursor to the first main meal of the day. In fact, life at sea practically revolves around meal times, and first up was breakfast.
It's 8 a.m. and it is time for breakfast aboard Titanic, though if you are an early riser, you may have already had a small breakfast of fresh fruit and scones and coffee and tea in your stateroom. It would have been brought by one of the stewards. Now, breakfast is served in the first-class dining saloon and includes numerous dishes like omelets, baked apples, kidneys and bacon, grilled ham, sausage, sirloin steak, and mutton chops to order. Then there is vegetable stew, an assortment of smoked fish, along with potatoes and numerous rolls like cornbread, scones, graham rolls, and Vienna rolls, which are basically like Kaiser rolls. Then there are cereals like puffed rice and Quaker Oats, both of which are made by the Quaker Oats Company, an executive of which, Walter Douglas, was traveling aboard Titanic. One of my favorite little tidbits about the menus that survived Titanic is the typo on the first-class breakfast menu. Along with Narbonne honey and black currant conserve, they offered Oxford marmalade. Supposed to be marmalade, obviously. Now, that is a lot of options for breakfast, but don't stuff yourself, because that's actually going to be the lightest meal of the day.
As breakfast ends, your table party is in agreement that the meal was delicious, but you realise that you may have overindulged just a little bit. You think that maybe some exercise is in order, but with the morning air still too chilly to enjoy a lap around the deck, you think that your next stop will be the ship's gymnasium, which is located on the boat deck and only accessible to your fellow first-class passengers. Because it's considered a premium facility, you'll need to spend a little extra on your ticket to the gymnasium at the purser's office, but you did that yesterday. Ticket in hand, you step into the space and you're immediately impressed by the variety of equipment available. The gym offers everything from rowing machines, a punching bag, back and stomach massages, and even an electric camel. You stare in confusion at this particular contraption until another passenger explains that it is, in fact, meant to replicate the experience of actually riding on the back of a camel. Some of your fellow passengers seem unsure about all these newfangled machines because many in high society were hesitant to work up a sweat in public, but you find them all rather fascinating. But while a ride on a mechanical camel does sound amusing, you opt for a quick jaunt on the exercise bike instead. The exercise bikes are paired and you can actually race your friend to see who can pedal the fastest. After a hard workout, nothing sounds better than a relaxing cool down in the Turkish baths, a new and very exciting addition to the first-class accommodations of ships at sea. Your friends, who had previously travelled on Olympic, raved about their experiences in the baths, and it's indisputably one of the most ornately decorated areas on the ship. Of course, relaxation comes at a price, and you find that, like the gym, you'll need to once again purchase a ticket from the purser's office in order to gain entry. Back up to C deck, you purchase your $1 admission, then you head for F deck, entering the Turkish baths, and once you step into the cooling room space, you're instantly overwhelmed by the stunning Moorish design. It becomes even harder to believe you're still on a ship. You rest your tired muscles in the steam room, then you finish off with a brief rest in the cooling room, but just next door is the ship's swimming pool. Filled with salt water, it's incredibly refreshing to jump in and swim a short lap. But all this relaxing and exercise has made time slip by, and now your stomach begins to rumble. You realise it's time to meet up with your travelling companions for lunch.
Luncheon was served at 1 o'clock p.m. and just like breakfast was served in the first-class dining saloon and had multiple courses. On April 14th, the meal began with soups like kakiliki and consommé fermier, a very light vegetable broth. Then if you want something a little heavier, you can have the chicken a la Maryland, which was essentially cutlets of fried chicken covered in white gravy. The grill was also open should you want mutton, or you could rush the buffet with a selection of small seafoods, roast beef, veal and ham pie, ox tongue, and galantine of chicken, which is a classic French dish where chicken is cooked and then, along with vegetables, is stuffed into its own skin. These were the types of complex dishes that the first-class passengers would have been accustomed to at the time. The chef Auguste Escoffier of the Ritz hotels in London and Paris had set a high bar for fine dining, and the people on the ship would have eaten at those hotels and would have expected the same quality of food. Many of his recipes actually form the basis of most of the first-class menus aboard Titanic. Now, once you sated yourself on these opulent dishes, you could have a dessert of apple meringue or custard pudding, then a full course of cheese. Then I would imagine you would need to lie down for a bit just to digest, especially because you might actually have a smaller meal of an afternoon tea before having the biggest meal of the day, which is dinner. Essentially, the whole trip is just going from meal to meal to meal to meal.
With everyone energized after a fine meal, you accompany your group up to the boat deck where, by this point, the weather has warmed and the air is perfect for a leisurely stroll. The deck seems to stretch out for miles ahead of you, and you stop to notice the parade of women in airy gowns billowing in the wind, and men with their tailored suits and their canes tapping lightly against the wooden deck. A few passengers are walking their dogs, while others have taken to lounging in deck chairs, most of which have been reserved ahead of time at the purser's office. Throughout the day, crew members have marked deck games on the pine decking with chalk, and you find your friends playing a spirited game of deck quoits. It seems easy in principle, you simply toss a weighted rope ring into the circle to win points, but the gentle swaying of the ship and the cool breeze makes it actually a little bit harder than you thought. Others are playing shuffleboard, a similar concept, but instead of throwing, you rake these hard discs along the deck with a cue or a long pole. It's a lot of fun, and a lot of laughs are had. Around you, stewards serve refreshments to passengers who sit in the sun under their heavy steamer blankets on deck chairs. Some of them sip tea or coffee, while others indulge in one of the most cherished traditions on the ocean, turtle soup. The green sea turtle has long been used for bouillon, a kind of broth, and it's become a tradition to eat it at sea. After a brief catch-up with your new friends on all the events of the crossing so far, it's decided that they should join you for dinner that evening to continue the sparkling conversation. With all the plans ironed out, the next step before dinner should be to make use of the ship's Marconi wireless services to send a quick update message back home. You head for the purser's office again and you start planning your message, but at $1 per word, you decide to keep it brief. All safe on board ship, weather fine, made some new friends, sending love, Titanic. The purser writes your message down onto a Marconigram and lets you know it will be delivered from the wireless shack. With the messages paid for and on their way to the recipients, it's almost time to dress for dinner. As the afternoon grows late, you think it best to take a turn around the deck again. The ship throws up a little salty sea spray as she churns ahead and a chill is in the air. Too cold for you. You turn back for the warmth of the ship's interiors and feel like perusing the library. Fortunately, there's quite a selection. You step into the sumptuous lounge, richly carpeted and clad in spectacularly carved wooden panelled walls. It towers overhead, one of the tallest rooms for first class on the ship, thanks to the inclusion of an elevated deckhead above that provides ample light through the massive bay windows. People quietly chatter, and there at the far end of the room is a bookcase stocked with books, each bound in exactly the same simple leather cover, and only differentiated by their gilt titles. You pick out a copy of My First Summer in the Sierra, You remember your friends raving about this adventurous title. It came out last year. You settle into a comfortable chair and begin to read. The time has ticked by, and through the big bay windows, you begin to see the sun low in the horizon. That can mean only one thing. Dinner will soon be upon you. As if to underscore your realization, a steward appears into view on the promenade deck and begins to play the roast beef of old England on a bugle. You chuckle to yourself. On most other lines, the stewards simply bang a gong or a bell, but the White Star Line has a flair for the dramatic. You put the book back and you head down the stairs to your cabin to prepare for dinner. Unlike last night's more relaxed attitude, you will be expected to pull out all of the stops for this evening's dress. Women don their finest gowns from Paris, New York, London, and Milan in a dazzling array of colours. Jewels of all descriptions will hang from necks and gloved wrists. For men, it's a more Spartan affair. White tie is the order of the day, with boiled, stiff-fronted white dinner shirts and hard starched collars with long flowing black tailcoats. But a handful of men are bold enough to wear a variation of this seemingly ancient tradition. They wear short jackets instead with black bow ties. This will one day be known as a tuxedo, but in 1912 the style is still in its relative infancy. Once you're sufficiently dressed to impress, it's time to make your way down the beautiful grand staircase into the dining saloon for dinner. The sounds of laughter and conversation become louder as you make your way down the flowing staircase and step into the wide, airy reception room. The ship's orchestra soars on their cellos, playing a Scott Joplin ragtime piece, and everybody looks resplendent, some sitting elegantly in little wicker chairs that dot the room. After mingling a little bit with some familiar faces, you make your way into the saloon proper. You find your table and slide into your seat, excited to indulge in your first proper dinner at sea.
When it came to dinner, first-class passengers had a couple of options. They could eat in the first-class dining saloon, which was included in the price of your ticket, or if you wanted to be a little fancier, then you could pay to eat at the a la carte restaurant, often called the Ritz restaurant, as it bore such a resemblance to the Ritz in London. Operated independently by Italian restaurateur Luigi Gatti, who ran Odanino's Imperial restaurant in London, the a la carte restaurant featured 60 staff members who were separate from the rest of the crew. The restaurant only had a capacity for 137, so it was considered a bit more exclusive than dining even at the first-class dining saloon. On her last night aboard Titanic, Mrs. Walter Douglas described having hothouse grapes and fresh peaches at the restaurant, a real luxury in April in the North Atlantic. She said she dined the last night in the Ritz restaurant. It was the last word in luxury. The tables were gay with pink roses and white daisies, the women in their beautiful shimmering gowns of satin and silk, the men immaculate and well-groomed, the stringed orchestra playing music from Puccini and Tchaikovsky. But just because the first-class dining saloon was not exclusive as the a la carte restaurant, that doesn't mean that it wasn't just as opulent. On the contrary, the meal could be upwards of 10 courses, with hors d'oeuvres, oysters, and soups, followed by fish, then meat like filet mignon or chicken lyonnaise. There was a lamb with mint sauce, roast duckling, and sirloin of beef with chateau potatoes. Then to cleanse the palate, you had punch romaine, which was a sorbet floating in champagne. Then roast squab, a cold asparagus dish, foie gras, and desserts like Waldorf pudding and the opulent and impressive peaches suspended in a green chartreuse jelly. Then some rich French ice cream before moving on to coffee. Now the portions, of course, were usually quite small and you didn't necessarily have everything, but still, it was a lot of food and dinner could take several hours to eat. But you're in the middle of the North Atlantic on a boat, so what else you gotta do?
Long after the fine china and the silverware have been cleared away, the conversation and the wine both flow freely at the table. You're content to chat the night away, but with the hour growing later, somebody at the table suggests taking the party elsewhere. While many of the women opt to stay behind and carry on socialising in the dining or reception room, most of the men depart for the smoking room for cigars, port or brandy, and a notorious shipboard favourite, gambling. Many of the richest passengers on board are inclined to disembark the ship at the end of the voyage, just a few dollars richer or poorer, and one of the most popular ways to do so is by playing poker. While there are plenty of your average everyday players hoping to simply get lucky while at sea, in recent years ocean travel has become something of a haven for hustlers. It's become all too common for conmen to identify an unassuming mark travelling on board, then use a variety of tricks and schemes to render their hapless victim penniless. It's got so bad that stewards recognise the same faces over and over again, so some have taken to wearing disguises. The schemes get more and more complex. Con artists pose as friendly shipboard companions who let the clueless mark win every night at poker until fleecing them for all they're worth on the final evening out from New York. Some women work with con men too in complex partnerships, distracting the mark into financial ruin. It's almost like a business. Steamship companies like the White Star Line are at pains to warn you and your fellow passengers again and again that you shouldn't be gambling at all, but there's little they can do to stop it. With the new ocean liners able to cross the Atlantic faster than ever before, and the growing Edwardian obsession with speed taking over, another form of gambling has gained popularity, and that's betting on the ship's daily run. Passengers are excited to keep tabs on the ship's speed and the distance travelled. They now feverishly bet against one another daily to see who can accurately predict the ship's performance from each day in miles. In the evening hours, the smoking room becomes a hotbed of activity, with passengers eagerly vying to place their bets on the run via elaborate auction pools. Now, these pools function much the same as auctions on land, with a gavel-wielding auctioneer holding command over the affair with rapid-fire pace and all the charm necessary to part a fool with his money. Passengers each purchase one number out of a set of 20 sequential numbers. In this case, the numbers represent the range of possible miles travelled, hoping that the number they choose will be the exact number or the closest number of miles travelled by the ship the next day when the announcement is made at noon. There are several factors to take into account when placing your bet. The ship's average speed obviously plays a major role, followed by things like weather, ice reports. All of these could slow the ship down. There's been talk that certain passengers have been able to actually bribe crew members for inside information on weather conditions in order to give themselves the better odds, but if it did happen, certainly no one in the smoking room would be advertising it. This tradition is so ingrained on steamships that you remember from your last summer voyage on the Mauritania that one of the smoking room's wooden tables has been smoothened and flattened by years of abuse from the auctioneer's gavel. With the hour growing late, the chaos of the smoking room dying down to more of a lull, it's almost time for you to retire for the evening. You decide on one final stop out on deck for some fresh air before bed. Now, nearly all the lights have been extinguished because almost everybody's asleep, warm in their beds. Stepping out onto the railing, you gaze at the dark ocean, the stars blanketing the sky too numerous to count. You look out towards the horizon and you picture the endless sea replaced with the beauty of the New York City skyline. Tomorrow will bring you one day closer to your destination, but for now, you can't say you're looking forward to disembarking. The low hum of the engines, coupled with the steady motion of the ship in the sea, begins to lull you to a state of sleepiness. Your comfortable plush bed and a warm cup of tea sound like the perfect way to end a busy day at sea. You step away from the railing and back inside the ship. Tomorrow is another day.